coming along, and we hope you enjoy yourselves tonight.
Right, this evening we are looking at the topic High Integrity, High Reward. We're doing that in the creative arts. It's dance, drama, song, music and spoken word.
But before you get too comfortable, we're actually going to kick it off with a participation song. So our musicians are going to come on. If everybody could please stand and let's join in with the music. Let's welcome them on.
Fire
you to put anything into the bag. This service is our gift to you. However, if you do, thank you very much. I'll just pray for you, friends. Lord, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for the people here, and I thank you for what's been given. We want to ask that you multiply. Amen? Okay, after the service, if you want to socialise and have a bit of fun, there is tea and coffee out in the back foyer. Everyone's welcome to join in on that. Next week, we have another very, very, very special event here at Hosanna. That's at 10:30 a.m. live next week. You're most welcome to bring your friends and family. It's called Turning Failure into Success. If you want more information, grab one of those. They're just out in the front foyer. Also, if you're new to Hosanna or you're wondering what Hosanna is about, there is a Connect with Me card. You can grab one of those from the foyer out there as well. Pull it in, pop it into the box, and someone will be in contact with you during the week. Right, we have got a drama for you right now, so can you put your hands together for the drama section.
There's a brother and other cousins nearby.
Lennon, that's where you grew up, isn't it?
Yes, it is, dear. It's where I was born, in fact. I'm going home.
Are you sure you're going to be okay?
Oh, I'm going to be fine, dear. Don't you worry about me. You've spent a lot of time looking after me since my husband died. Now it's time to look after yourself.
Let me get that.
Thank you, dear.
Look, I'm going to come with you.
What do you mean?
I mean, I'm going to come with you. I want to help you. I want to look after you. Your sister's not going to be around forever.
Oh, don't be silly, dear. I'm going to be fine. You don't worry about me. You start looking after yourself.
But I want to go. I want to be with you. I want to care for you.
Look, dear. I'm too old to get a new husband. Okay? I'm not going to get married again. But you, dear, you're young. You're still young and you're still attractive. Go out there and find yourself a husband. Don't become an old widow like me.
Yoni, you don't understand. I want to go with you. Where you go, I will go. You are my family.
Are you sure that's what you want to do?
Yes, I'm completely sure. You're like a second mother to me. I love you. Wherever you go, I really do. I really do want to go with you.
Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you.
every one of us faces each day choices that we make that'll spell out clearly the kind of integrity that we have, the way we react, the kinds of attitudes that we carry, the things that we do, the ideas that we look at, the concepts that we might want to spell out in our lives. And they spell out exactly who we are. We sometimes don't like who we see in ourselves, and sometimes we do. Sometimes we like ourselves when we would be better to actually take a closer look. Other times we hate ourselves when we shouldn't. And each of us is different. And each thing we do will determine the way we are perceived by others. But more importantly than anything else, it'll determine exactly what we are in the eyes of God. Tonight we're going to look at a story. You've seen the dance just now. And the song, I think that song, was that an original? It wasn't? I wondered if it was. My wife asked me and I said, I don't know. And I just want to pick up the story because the story is quite an intriguing story. There are a number of characters in the story. Each one of them has a different role. Each one of them there's a different statement about who they are. And in the story, each of their names actually has a significance. Each name means a different thing and spells out who they are. And so I'd like to read just a little bit of the story. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without 2 sons and her husband. When she heard of Moab, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them and said, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why should you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grow up?" Now, the question she's asking is because in their culture, what would actually happen, the girls who had married her sons, any other sons that she had as a mother, would actually have to take those women on as their wives because to allow for the procreation of the family, the ongoing line of the family. And so the other brothers, if there happens to be other brothers alive, actually go and marry them to continue the family line. Now, I know some of you might not be fussed on your husband's brothers, but you would be forced to marry them by tradition. Interesting little side. Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," said Naomi. "Call me Mara, because the Lord Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. And so the story goes on, and I'm going to unpack a little bit of a little later. We have a woman. And I want to start tonight by saying this woman, Ruth, was a woman of high integrity. And the consequences of her high integrity was that she actually had high results in her life. Very high results. And sometimes we sort of live life and we don't think much. But I want to touch on the characters that are in this story, just to explain a little bit of what's happening here. See, first of all, we have Orpah. Now, Orpah, which is very similar to Oprah, except that Oprah doesn't mean the same thing. Oprah means, I was intrigued, I saw it today. It means dust, dustiness. I'm sure she would be appreciating that if we told her. But Orpah actually means something quite different. She was obviously a relatively beautiful woman, and because of the context of the story, and Naomi was no woman of small means in some ways. We are a little puzzled about some of the things in the Bible, but this woman had a name for something. And when she was born, the parents must have noticed something, because they often had the tradition of naming their children according to what they saw. And could you imagine this kind of thinking happening in our culture? Her name meant her neck or neckiness. Now, I sat there and thought about that. You can imagine her husband turning to her and saying, every time he saw her and he said, "Hello, neckiness." I mean, every time he said Orpah, that's what he was saying. "You got a great neck, neckiness. Can I kiss it?" I can imagine. But this is Orpah. She was a woman who, as the story said, actually decided that she wasn't going to stay in the end. She offered to go with Ruth, and that would have been the tradition of the cultures of the day. But she, at the end of the day, decided she was not going to go, and so she turned back. So that's Orpah, the necky one. Second character we have in the story, and she had her hair greyed up here, and when she came on, some of you laughed, that I noticed tonight. That's what she's going to look like when she gets older, eh, Greg? Still looking fairly young, even though the hair may go a little grey. Naomi. What does Naomi mean? Well, Naomi is a very special name. My pleasantness. That's what it means. My pleasantness. And really, for Naomi, she'd had a pleasant life. She spoke about how good it had been. She'd gone away full. She'd travelled to Moab, and she'd had a great life, but she was coming back empty. And so in the process of the whole time, she changed her name. "Don't call me Naomi," she says in the story. Call me Mara. And Mara means bitter, bitterness. And so in the midst of her life, she felt like her name was in a phase of change. So we have a woman who's in a life of transition, a life of hardship, a life of feeling as if God's hand was weighing heavily on her. She had felt as if her life had been one of great goodness, but she was struggling with this whole thing. And then, of course, we have Ruth. Now, Ruth is a totally different person. Her name is intriguing. In the original Jewish culture, and I have a book with all the original meanings of all the names in the Hebrew culture as it was, Her name means satisfied. Satisfied. There's a woman, a young woman, who lost her husband. Every time he looked at her and spoke to her, he was calling her satisfied. A little different to what we have. No, I mean, some of us have got names with real meanings that we know and understand and we appreciate. My one, Gary, means mighty warrior. I never liked my name when I was younger until when I got older I suddenly discovered what my name meant and I thought, yeah, that's me. Well, it was a bit of a joke in a way, but it has changed. But what significance does this have in the story? Because it does. The names of the characters in the story are actually very real people in very real situations with the story of this woman who was called satisfied. And she looked at it. She seemed to be satisfied. And we need to ask the question, why was it that Ruth became the person that she was? Why was it? Well, from the time she was a young girl, for some reason, the family had named her this thing, Satisfied, Ruth. She'd grown up, and we can see in the light of her life, the way that she lived out her life as she got older, there were some strengths about Ruth that were a little unusual. In fact, so unusual that she's one of the few women who's recorded in the Bible with such a favourable story in the way that it is. There was Esther and Ruth in particular. Ruth was one of the most famous of the characters of the Bible, the Old Testament period. Ruth was considered a woman with incredibly high integrity. Ruth had this background in her life. And most of us don't have all the advantages that we'd like to have, and we don't know exactly what happened to Ruth in terms of her life as a young girl. She was raised as a Moabitess. She was a woman who really, in one sense or another, had gone through life, and at the end of it, though, she had lost her husband, and he wasn't that old. And here it was, and that was the case. A lot of people died in those days. So I want to take the journey and say, well, okay, Ruth was there, but there's another character that enters the story. You see, what actually happens in the journey of the story, Naomi, or Mara as she preferred to be called once she arrived back home, bitterness. And Ruth went to her town where she came from. And in this town, it turned out there was a guy there who was a relation of hers, of Naomi's, called Boaz. And in the culture, one of the things that would happen in their culture, if there were no sons that Naomi had, then there was a relation who would be considered what they called a redeemer. Now, if you read the book of Ruth, the rest of the book of Ruth, you'll see that Boaz was actually called in the text a redeemer, kinsman. So he could redeem her life. He could make sure she was married. He could marry her. But in the ensuing story, she pleads with her mother-in-law. She says, look, can I go out and gather some grain from those that are threshing the wheat and the barley? And the mother-in-law was really nervous about her doing this. There was one reason why. Because in that situation, the woman who gathered the grain was at a disadvantaged place. And often the men used to take advantage of them. And it used to actually, often young women would end up damaged for the rest of their lives. And so Naomi very reluctantly said to Ruth to go. And she wanders off. She finds some people gathering some seed, some wheat and beating it and separating it. So she enters a field and asks if she can gather behind the harvesters. That she would only get a little grain here and a little grain there. Maybe a little stalk with a few grains on it. And she gathered and she worked hard all day. Comes near the end of the day and the owner of the field turns up. His name, Boaz. He was this redeemer kinsman. He didn't know who she was. She didn't know who he was. So she worked the whole day. She gathered a huge amount of actual grain. And it must have been a hard day's work because it was commented on along that line. It must have been an incredibly hard day's work. So here she is. She gathers all this grain. She goes home to Naomi. And she says to Naomi, I've got this grain for you. Naomi said, where'd you go? I went to this field. And she tells the story. She said, where did you go? And she told her where. Oh, that's Boaz's field. He's one of your relations. In fact, He's a redeemer kinsman. Naomi, at that point, would have been aware of the fact that although he was a redeemer kinsman, there were others that were around that could also claim her. And so the story goes on. Ruth is told by Naomi to go back to the field and gather each day. Boaz treats her very kindly, tells her to come and eat with the gatherers, his workers, tells her to drink from the water that they've pulled from the men's jars, an unusual thing for him to do in the culture of the day. So then what happens, she goes back and tells Naomi how well Boaz is treating her. Incredibly high a respect that Boaz was showing to a woman, and that wasn't common in the day. So here we have the story, and then it changes. Naomi says to her, Boaz is being incredibly kind to you. He's a redeemer kinsman. He's one you could marry. She said, I want you to do something. Tonight, after you've gathered, I want you to go and observe where Boaz sleeps when he sleeps in the big barn. And when he's gone to sleep, sneak in the dark, lift the end of his blanket where his feet are, and lay at his feet and cover yourself with his blanket. Now, you guys would think that's a bit of a funny story. Now, it certainly wouldn't be very acceptable to do that around here because people would be suspicious of all sorts of things. And the fact she was doing it in the dark, oh my goodness me. But that was the tradition of the day. So she did this, and before it became light, Boaz stirred and woke, and he became aware of her presence there at his feet. So he turns to her and he talks to her, and she tells him who she is. She tells him clearly about what Naomi told her to do. And Boaz says, look, go home now while it's still dark. Nobody can see you. Don't tell anybody. I'm going to go because there's another man who has the right to redeem you before I do. And so he goes to the town centre the next morning as the sun rises. He calls together the elders of the town. He gathers them all together around the gate, which was their tradition. Kind of like a public meeting, but with the high authority of the town gathered together. And as he gathers them around, he calls this other kinsman, redeemer, the guy who had the right to Ruth first. And he says to him, Naomi's returned and there's a field that you can have. You can buy if you want to. The kinsman said, oh, I would like to buy it. And then Boaz plays his secret hand. He says this. He said, if you buy it, there's a woman that comes with it. And you have to marry her. Now Boaz, as far as we, this other redeemer kinsman, as far as we know, had not seen Ruth. It seems to be the essence of the story. That's the way it goes. And so he did a bit of a flip side. Oh, no. He says, I don't want a field with a woman. He must have had enough trouble with the woman in his own life. And so he dived out of this deal. And what they used to do, they used to take their sandal off and pass it to each other and swap sandals as a sign of their agreement in front of the townsfolk. And that was their deal. They never had parchment things that they drew up documents about the land. They just exchanged sandals. That was the way they did it. And so they did. Seems like a strange tradition. I wouldn't want to wear the other guy's sandal, but never mind. Here we go. And so the deal was made. And Boaz ends up marrying Ruth. And they have this wonderful life. And Naomi has her life restored. It's just a romantic story. A true story, but a very romantic one. You see, what I want to do is look at this. Because we were looking at the characters before. I want to pick up on Boaz, who got together at the end of the day with Ruth and they got married. And Boaz means in him is strength. In him is strength. Now, we're not sure whether it's talking about God. There's probably the most likely sort of meaning behind the thing. In him is strength. So I want to touch on some characteristics of integrity that Ruth had that took her from a life that could have been one of poverty, could have been one of despair, could have been very destructive. In fact, that's the way it was looking. And yet she chose to walk right into that type of life without any real hope of having a husband. There were two reasons for that. One, it was unlikely that one of the Jewish people would have married a Moabite woman in their towns. It was unlikely that that would happen. There were not a lot of men who would have, because there was an understanding amongst the Jewish people that they were not to marry outside like that. There was all sorts of complications involved. She took a huge risk. Now, I just want to simply outline tonight some characteristics of integrity that she had. And the first one is faithfulness. She was incredibly faithful. The second one, after faithfulness, is that she had a right attitude. She said to her mother-in-law, I'm not going to leave you stranded. You need my support. And she put aside her own desires for a husband, and I'm sure she would have loved to have had a husband. And it became quite self-evident later in the story that that was the case, that she did want a husband. She went to a lot of effort to make sure she got one in the end. And then the third characteristic, she was also respectful. She was very respectful of those around her. She was so respectful that she immediately gained respect. In fact, don't you notice that people who show no respect receive no respect? Those who give respect receive respect. Isn't it true? Yeah, I'm glad you're awake. You see, the reality is she was faithful, she had an attitude that was good, and she was respectful. Those three things were enough to start to change things. But not only was she like that, she also had some other dynamics to her. She was a risk taker, one who was willing to step out right on the edge of risk. And she would say to Naomi, your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Because she saw the value of what Naomi had over and above what she had experienced in her own life. And she didn't want to go back to the old ways that she'd had previously. And she knew, because she'd been married to Naomi's son, what it was to know the God that he worshipped. It was very, very different to what she had experienced. She took some huge risks. Then the second lot I want to touch on. First one, she was a God-honoring woman as a consequence. She really did honor God. She followed the things that he set down. She worked through the issues. She had this incredible integrity towards the woman of God, and she stuck it out. And it turns out that she ended up with her name in God's book. She had a high regard from God as a consequence of her ability and willingness to honor him. And then she was one who served. She was one who serves all the time. She was willing to go out and to feed Naomi every day if it need be, the hardest way she possibly could, because she couldn't hope to get an ordinary job. Nowadays, we think about it very easily. A woman can go out and get an executive position if they have the skills and they're willing to apply themselves. Or they can go and get just about any job in the bank or whatever. In those days, it wasn't that easy. It was very difficult for women who had lost their husbands. In fact, it was so difficult that the community had to support the widows because it was just too hard to survive. It was a male society in lots and lots of ways. But the women they did often try to care for them. But often, women in this situation faced severe disadvantage, especially seeing as she wasn't from Judah. She wasn't one of their people. And then the last thing, she was a person who was in for the long haul. She wasn't one who was going to give up easy. She's one who decided, I'm going to nail this thing. I'm going to get to the end. I'm going to work it through. And she could see in being in there for the long haul that it was going to be worth it. And was it worth it? Yes. Boaz was a wealthy man. Incredibly wealthy man in actual fact, as it turns out. But a man who also loved her intensely. Being in there for the long haul brought great reward for her. Incredible reward in her life. Now, guys, listen to this, guys. We don't very often see women as heroes sometimes, some of us. Some of us do and some of us don't. They put up with carrying our children. They put up with our children. Yes, I know they created them. as much as we did. You see, the reality is, guys, that our heroes tend to be guys who, maybe there are some good heroes in their midst, but we can learn something from the woman. Don't you agree, ladies? Only a few ladies agree. Never mind, guys. Don't you agree, ladies? Yeah, show some enthusiasm there. I want to ask a question, though, now. What do we learn from the other character in the story, Orpah? Orpah, remember, her name meant neckiness. She decided that she wasn't going to go with Naomi. And one of the first things I think we learn is this: tough decisions are moments of reality to the future, and we can miss the moments. And I think that Orpah possibly missed out on some great times. There were two Redeemer kinsmen. She was necky. She might have been pretty by the sounds of things. Whatever. But you know, we can end up facing some tough decisions, and what we do with them will set the course of our lives for the rest of our days. And I think Ruth made the best decision. At the end of the day, she got great results. The second thing I think we can learn from her: you can miss out on great things. Every one of us can miss out on great things. There are times in my own life, you know, I remember years ago, I was a young man, myself and my friend, we were apprentices, and we were starting to learn to save our money. We both skied at a ski field called Porter's Heights. And I used to be up there most weekends. At the beginning of the weekend, I'd go home late Saturday night so I could be at church on Sunday, because I'd become a Christian by the stage. And I used to go out and work on the chairlifts and get them going, things like this. And in the middle of the season, we were told that there was this guy who'd been living on another mountain, watching the snow for over a year. He'd been watching avalanches. He'd already been observing it for several years beforehand. He was on this mountain observing for a long time. In other words, he lived there, literally lived on the mountain. Went through the rough weather patches, went through everything. Why was he there? Well, he was there because there were some guys who said, that basin there could be a great ski basin, huge one. So there was a public meeting to open up the sale of shares to start the ski field. And on the night the sale of shares, it wasn't a terrible amount of money that they were asking for the shares, because it was a new venture and it was a high-risk thing. He publicly stated in the meeting, he said, the road is going to be very difficult to make into the mountain. It's going to have slips and there's going to be problems with it. But the ski field itself has to be the best ski field in New Zealand. And he sold it to all of us. Myself and John went along with $600 each. In those days, that was quite a lot of money. I remember sitting in that meeting with my $600 and went along there and thought, we're in for the ski field thing. And we sat down, and I remember the two of us sitting down there, and then there were these other people. We arrived early. We were determined to get a good spot, you see. We sat down, and this guy arrived in front of us. He took his coat off, and he folded it over the seat, and it laid there, and it was lined with silk. Then we noticed all the others had clothing that made us look like we were in shabby clothes. We were in our best clothes we had. It came to the opportunity to actually embark on the purchase of shares. We could fill out some forms of an application to actually purchase shares on the Mount Hutt ski field, which was not a ski field at the time. Two of us looked at each other and got all embarrassed because we only had $600, and these guys obviously had loot in our terms. So the two of us got up and walked out of that meeting. 10 years later, that $600 would have been worth a phenomenal amount of money. We missed the opportunity. There was a great opportunity. That $600 may not have been as much as other people had, but that $600 several years later was worth a number of $1,000s, several $1,000s. I remember at one point being over $10 a share, and that would have multiplied us incredibly. It went even higher at one point. I'm not sure where it's at now. But we do miss opportunities. Now, it might have been a good thing I didn't enter it on that occasion. I'm not sure. You know? But the reality is, we can miss out on opportunities because we don't make the right choices. Because we have lacked the integrity that we maybe need to carry. Now, I'm not saying that Orpah actually lacked integrity. We can't say that about her. But she certainly did miss out on some things that she could have experienced in her life. Ruth had the resolution to stick it out. She had the determination to be the friend of her mother-in-law for the rest of her life and to supply her needs. She was going to be faithful to her husband even though he might be dead. She was going to be committed to this family, and she was going to stick it out. And she could be said to have absolute integrity. She could be said to have absolute integrity. And for each one of us, we need to be people who are going to think about who we are. We need to be people who are going to reshape some of our thinking, because all of us, there are areas in our lives where integrity may not be our strong point. And some of the ways we act, some of the ways that we behave will show that clearly. You see, what I believe we need to look at tonight is two passages of Scripture. The Bible speaks about these kinds of issues all the time. Here's one of them. The man of integrity, or the woman of integrity it would include as well, walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out. It's a fact that we all know, but have we thought about it in terms of our own lives? The second one goes like this. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. You see, for each one of us here tonight, we need to look at what we are doing. You know the old stories about the blondes. It doesn't only apply to blondes, it happens to everybody. But there was this woman who was chatting with her building manager when she happened to mention that the tenants in the apartments above hers were awfully noisy. Most nights, she said, they stomp around up there as if they are killing cockroaches or something. All evening this goes on till around midnight, she says. And the manager was feeling very empathetic towards her. That's terrible, said the building manager. Do you want me to speak to them about it? Oh, said the lady, she says, oh no, it's not necessary. It doesn't keep me up or anything like that, because most nights I usually stay up. He says, oh, is that right? So you don't want to be worried? No, she said, most nights I'm staying up and practicing my trumpet till about that time in any case. See, she had no integrity about what she was doing. She had no idea that she'd failed. And that is the problem that we often have, because we're not aware of the lacks of integrity that we have. We're not always aware of the things that we need to look at and we need to seriously approach. You know what Anne read out to us earlier, the heart of the discerning acquires knowledge. The ears of the wise seek it out. The man of integrity walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out at the end of the day. And so, in terms of this, in conclusion tonight, I want to ask you this question. Is integrity a way of life for you? And I believe integrity covers all the things we looked at tonight. I believe integrity covers those issues of being faithful, of having right attitudes, of being respectful to each other, of being people who are willing to take some risks when we need to, of being people who are God-honouring, being people who are going to serve with a heart that's fully open to Him, and being people who are going to do it for the long haul. And the only way we can do it is if we're willing to do it the way we were designed to be. We're designed not for the things we do wrong, we're designed for the things that we do right. And I want to talk to God right now, and I want to invite you to join me tonight. Let's do that. Father God, we want to admit right now to you, there are times when we've lacked integrity, when we've told a little untruth we shouldn't have told, when we've not been faithful to our friends or our workplaces or our neighbour or There's all sorts of people that we need to think about. There are times when we've made promises to a man or a woman, our husband or wife, our girlfriend or boyfriend, and we've not been wise and we haven't worked with integrity in the way we should. Sometimes we promised our children that we're going to go and do something and then we haven't done it. And we've lacked integrity. And we've always made excuses for ourselves, God, at different times in our lives. And so we want to say to you tonight, Lord, we'd like to be like Ruth. We'd like to be like Boaz. People who have integrity. People who have names that have lived through history because of simple acts of keeping good integrity. So guide us and help us to allow you to shape us in Jesus' name. And they all said,